In November 2004, the United States Congress passed a bill called the American Jobs Creation Act. It was framed as a bill for working Americans, small businesses, manufacturers, the backbone of the economy. What it actually was? A tax holiday for multinational corporations that had been parking profits overseas to avoid US tax rates. Before the law, bringing that money home cost a 35% tax rate. After the law, it cost just over 5%. 93 major corporations had lobbied for this provision. Together, they spent $282 million making it happen. They saved $62.5 billion. A study published in the Journal of the American Taxation Association calculated the return on investment 22,000%. Senator John McCain called it "no lobbyist left behind." But here's the thing. This wasn't a scandal. It wasn't illegal. It barely lasted a news cycle. It was just how the system works. Lobbying is technically a constitutional right. The First Amendment protects the right to petition the government. In principle, that is what lobbying is. Organized citizens communicating with their representatives. The first known lobbyist in American history was William Hull in 1792, a Revolutionary War veteran petitioning Congress for better compensation for soldiers. He was, by most accounts, unsuccessful, and when he later became a government official himself, he became the first person to pass through what we now call the revolving door. For most of the 19th century, lobbying existed in the shadows, largely unregulated. It wasn't until the Federal Regulation of Lobbying Act of 1946, and then the more comprehensive Lobbying Disclosure Act of 1995, that the industry was formally registered, tracked, and made visible. The intent was transparency. If lobbying was going to happen, the thinking went, at least the public should be able to see it. What happened instead is that visibility legitimized the system. Registering made lobbying respectable. And when something becomes respectable, capital follows. Federal lobbying spending in 2000, $1.6 billion. By 2023, $4.2 billion. In 2023, interest groups spent $4.2 billion lobbying the federal government. According to Open Secrets, a nonpartisan organization that tracks money in politics, that is a nominal record. And it comes on top of over $46 billion in combined state and federal lobbying since 2015. To understand where that money goes, you need to understand the structure of the industry. A lobbyist is not a protester outside a building. A lobbyist is, in most cases, someone who used to be inside the building. The pharmaceutical industry has been the single largest federal lobbying spender every year since 1999, according to Open Secrets. From 1999 through 2024, the sector spent over $6.1 billion shaping federal policy on drug pricing, patent law, regulatory approval, and Medicare reimbursement rates. In 2023 alone, the entire health sector spent $739 million at the federal level. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce spent $69 million that year. The National Association of Realtors spent $52 million. These aren't bribes, they're access. A pharmaceutical company doesn't walk into a senator's office and hand over cash. What they do is hire former Senate staffers, former FDA officials, former White House advisors, and employ them to request meetings, draft policy language, and make the argument that a given regulation would harm innovation, or raise costs, or stifle competition. The argument might be entirely legitimate, or it might not be, but either way, the meeting happens, and the company that can't afford that meeting doesn't get one. The mechanism that makes this system self-sustaining is what insiders call the revolving door. Open Lobby, which analyzed over 726,000 lobbying filings, identified more than 5,000 registered lobbyists who disclosed prior government positions. That is roughly 9 former government officials for every single member of Congress now working in the influence industry. A report by Public Citizen found that 59% of former members of the 115th Congress who moved into the private sector took jobs in lobbying, consulting, or at trade groups working to influence federal government policy. The Center for Public Integrity found that 82% of revolving door lobbyists end up lobbying the same agency or office they came from. Think about what that means structurally. A congressional staffer spends a decade developing expertise in Medicare reimbursement. They build relationships with agency directors, committee chairs, and legislative counsel. They understand the internal politics of every committee that touches health policy. Then they leave. They take a job at a lobbying firm representing major hospital systems. Their salary roughly triples, and their entire value to that firm is the access and institutional knowledge they spent a decade building in public service. This pattern predates every administration currently serving, and it continues because the incentive structure makes it rational. If you are a government official and you know that a cooperative relationship with certain industries leads to a lucrative private sector career, the question isn't whether that knowledge influences your decision-making. The question is how. The reason lobbying spending has increased by over $1 billion in the last decade alone is simple. It works. Not sometimes. Consistently. When the Affordable Care Act came up in 2009, health sector lobbying jumped by $34 million in a single year. When the Lower Drug Costs Now Act came up in 2021, the pharmaceutical industry increased its federal lobbying by nearly $46 million in response. According to Open Secrets, the pharmaceutical industry has spent over $6.1 billion in federal lobbying since 1999. The pattern repeats across sectors. Tariff lobbying surged 561% between 2024 and 2025 as companies scrambled to shape import rules. AI-related mentions in lobbying filings surged over 400% since 2022 as companies raced to influence how artificial intelligence would be regulated before the rules were written. The earlier you get in, the more you shape the outcome. And the more the outcome favors your industry, the more rational it becomes to keep spending. A company spending $10 million lobbying against a regulation that would cost it $500 million isn't doing anything nefarious. It's doing math. The problem is what that math adds up to over time. In a functioning representative democracy, policy is supposed to reflect the interests of constituents. But constituent interests don't come with $69 million annual lobbying budgets. They come with a vote, cast once every 2 years. A landmark 2014 study by Princeton's Martin Guylands and Northwestern's Benjamin Page analyzed over 1,700 policy issues. Their finding, economic elites and organized interest groups have substantial independent impact on U.S. government policy, while average citizens have near zero independent influence. The system doesn't break the way you would expect, with a single dramatic failure. It degrades. Public trust in institutions erodes slowly, policy drifts further from the median voter, and the organizations with the most to gain from the status quo have the most resources to maintain it. Lobbying is not going away. It is too embedded in the architecture of American governance to be regulated out of existence. And the argument that it serves a legitimate function, translating complex industry expertise into policy, isn't wrong. What the data shows is that it serves some interests far more efficiently than others. The $4.2 billion spent in 2023 didn't go to 330 million Americans. It went to the organizations that could afford access to the people writing the laws. Whether that constitutes a broken system, or the system working exactly as designed, is a question this video isn't going to answer for you. But it's the right question to keep asking. Subscribe for more investigations like this one.